have walked through the barren remains of Babylon and the ancient Roman city of Antioch. I have visited the marble ruins of Leptis Magna, and now isolated in the desolate drifts of sand southeast of Tripoli. I have climbed at dawn up the ancient temples in Tikal, while flocks of brightly colored toucans leapt through the jungle foliage below. I have stood amid the remains of the ancient Egyptian city of Luxor along the Nile, looking at the statue of the great Egyptian pharaoh Ramses lying broken on the ground, with Percy Shelley's poem Ozymandias running through my head. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away. Civilizations rise, decay, and die. As societies become more complex, they become inevitably more precarious. They become increasingly vulnerable, burdened by vast bureaucracies, an increasingly rapacious and disconnected elite, and a blind loyalty to ideological systems and ideas that no longer correspond to reality. And as they begin to break down, there is a strange retreat by a frightened and confused population from reality, an inability to confront the fragility and impending collapse. The elites who speak in phrases and jargon that do not correspond to the real retreat into isolated compounds, whether at the court of Versailles, Forbidden City, or our own enclaves of wealth and privilege. The elites indulge in unchecked hedonism, the accumulation of vaster wealth and extravagant consumption. They shut themselves off from the suffering of the masses who are repressed to extract wealth upwards with greater and greater ferocity. Resources are ruthlessly and thoughtlessly depleted until they are exhausted or destroyed. As food and water shortages expand across the globe, as mounting poverty and misery, including rising food costs, trigger street protests in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe, our elites are doing what all elites do. They launch more wars, they build grander monuments to themselves, they plunge their nations deeper into debt, and they take it out on the backs of the workers and the poor. Collapse of our global economy, which wiped out a staggering $40 trillion of wealth, was only the first jolt. Extremists or ultra-conservatives squeezing the last drops of profit from nature and humanity. This is how all civilizations, including our own, ossify and die. The signs of imminent death. Maybe to those who can break free from our electronic hallucinations, undeniable. Common sense may cry out for a radical, new response, but the race towards self-immolation only accelerates because of our intellectual and moral paralysis. Human societies are as intoxicated and blinded by their own headlong rush toward death and destruction as they are by the search for erotic fulfillment. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy justice. Universities destroy knowledge. Government destroys freedom. The press destroys information. Religion destroys morals. And our banks destroy the economy. The implosion of national economies, the increasing anger of a beleaguered working class at home and abroad, the growing, desperate human migrations, and the refusal to halt our relentless destruction of the ecosystem on which human life depends are the harbingers of our own collapse. They are the consequences of the idiocy of our elite and the folly of globalization. Protests and movements that are not built around a complete reconfiguration, including a rapid dismantling of empire and the corporate state, can at best only forestall the inevitable. We will be saved only with the birth of a new and militant radicalism, one that defies all formal power structures. Human societies seem cursed to repeat these cycles of exploitation and collapse. The greater the extent of the deterioration, the less these societies are able to comprehend what is happening to them. And the earth is littered with the physical remains of human folly, ignorance, and hubris. There is a dark intoxication with extinction. Although this moment appears to be the denouement of the whole sad show of settled, civilized life that began some 5,000 years ago, for there is nothing left this time on the planet to seize, and we are now spending down the last remnants of our natural capital, including our forests, fossil fuel, air, and water. This time, when we go down, it will be global. There will be no new lands to pillage, no new peoples to conquer and exploit. Technology, which has obliterated the constraints of time and space, has turned our global village into a global death trap. The fate of Easter Island will be writ large across the broad expanse of planet Earth. The failure of the liberal class, whose role in society is designed to prevent unchecked assault by centralized power, is discovering what happens when you tolerate the intolerant. Let hate speech pollute your airwaves. Let corporations pry up your courts. Let the Christian religion be manipulated by charlatans to demonize Muslims, gays, intellectuals, discredit science, sanctify unfettered capitalism, and become a source of personal enrichment. Let unions wither under corporate assault. Let social services and public education be gutted and stripped of funding. Let Wall Street carry out fraud, deception, and plunder with impunity, and you roll out the welcome mat for fascism. The liberal class and much of the left has busied itself with the toothless pursuits of inclusiveness, multiculturalism, identity politics, and tolerance, and forgot about the primacy of justice. It naively sought to placate ideological and corporate forces bent on the destruction of the democratic state as well as the planet. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them. Workers fought long and hard for their rights. suffered brutal beatings, mass expulsions from company housing and jobs, endured crippling strikes, targeted assassinations of union leaders, and armed battles with hired gun thugs and state militias. They rallied around radicals. They had no illusion that the bosses were their friends. It is they who made possible our middle class and opened up our democracy. The elite fought back viciously. Our freedoms and rights were paid for with the blood of ordinary men and women. Those who fought this battle understood the innate cruelty of capitalism. The public debate, meanwhile, dominated by corporate control systems of information, ignores the steady impoverishment of the working class and absence of legal and regulatory mechanisms to prevent our reconfiguration into a neo-feudal society. The airwaves are saturated with good-looking and charming corporate apologists. They ask us why public sector employees have benefits while non-unionized working and middle-class people are denied. And the argument is ingenious. It pits desperate worker against desperate worker in a mad scramble for scraps. The elite will always promote itself at our expense. The pillars of the liberal establishment, which once made incremental and piecemeal reform possible, no longer function. The electronic and much of the print press has become a shameless mouthpiece for the powerful, a vehicle for spectacle and a magnet for corporate advertising. And there is no liberal institution left, the press, labor, culture, public education, the church, that makes any effort to hold back the corporate juggernaut. And the longer we are tricked into investing our faith in the power system, the more easily we will be exploited. The only place left for us is on the street. We must foment general strikes. We must be willing to accept the discomfort of arrest and jail. The elite, with no check left on their greed and criminality, are gorging on money while they are slashing basic services, budgets for schools, firefighters, and assistance programs for children and the elderly. So we will pay for the fraud they committed. We now live in Orwell's Oceania. All excesses are justified in the titanic fight against evil and the inculcation of fear. The pernicious ideology of permanent war has left us clamoring for our own enslavement. Like the residents of Oceania, we forgot that terrorism is a tactic and you cannot make war against a tactic. Terrorists are defeated by isolating them within their own societies. Muslims were appalled at what had been carried out in the name of their religion. And if we had had the courage to be vulnerable, rather than dropping iron fragmentation bombs all over the Middle East, we would be far safer and more secure today. We drank deep from the very dark elixir of nationalism, that toxic brew of self-exaltation and racism, that elevation of ourselves and denigration of others, and at that moment embraced the evil we set out to fight. We widened our occupation of Muslim land across the Middle East. proxy wars in Yemen and Pakistan, turned our backs on the brutal assaults by Israel against the Palestinians and Lebanese, and chose to speak to the Muslim world exclusively in the language of violence. We are doomed to pit our monsters against their monsters. Terrorism against us will not end until the state terrorism we practice on Muslim land ends. We began this cycle of hate, and only we can end it. Breaking dissidents who expose the war crimes we are committing in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan sends a message to all who contemplate defying state power. We break souls as well as bodies. We can all end up in Orwell's dreaded Room 101. Now that the credit is dried up, the mass-produced goods are no longer cheap, and our ability to make a decent standard of living is gone. We get Orwell's naked iron fist. The noose is tightening. The era of amusement is being replaced by the era of repression. Tens of millions of citizens have their emails, phone records, all communication turned over to the government. We are the most monitored and spied on citizenry in human history. Our daily routines are caught on dozens of security cameras. Our proclivities and habits are recorded on the internet. Our profiles are electronically generated. Our bodies are patted down at airports and filmed by scanners. And public service announcements, car inspection stickers, and public transportation posters constantly urge us to report suspicious activity. Public space has been privatized by corporations who use security systems to prevent public expressions of discontent and remind us that we are nothing more than their consumers. The enemy, we are told, is everywhere. Those who do not comply with the security dictates of the war on terror, a war which, as Orwell noted, is endless, are silenced. Terror, even for those who have nothing to do with terror, becomes the blunt instrument used by Big Brother to protect us from ourselves. Do you begin to see then what kind of world we are creating? A world of fear and treachery and torment. A world of trampling and being trampled upon. A world which will grow not less, but more merciless. Acts of resistance in the face of evil are moral acts. They are carried out because people of conscience can no longer tolerate abuse and despotism. They are carried out not because they are effective or even practical, but because they are right. All of our structures of power have embraced a radical evil. Our mediocre and bankrupt elite is desperately trying to save a system that cannot be saved. And more importantly, they are trying to save themselves. All attempts to work within this decayed system and this class of power brokers will prove useless. And resistance must respond to the harsh new reality of a global capitalist order that will cling to power through ever-mounting forms of brutal and overt repression. And those who profess a love of democracy and justice but who continue to cooperate with these established power structures, practice of false morality. They take refuge in the conception of themselves as practical men and women, as realists, as moderates. They stand on what they insist is the middle ground, without realizing that the middle ground has shifted under us, and the old paradigm of left and right, liberal and conservative, is meaningless. This failure to act is the worst form of moral cowardice. As long as we remain paralyzed by fear, we will continue to be disempowered. Courage is the highest of human virtues, because without it, we are unlikely to practice any other virtue. And once we find this courage, we find freedom. All resistance must recognize that the body politic and global capitalism are dying, and we should stop wasting energy trying to reform or appeal to it. To resist while there is still time has become a moral imperative. The capacity to refuse to cooperate offers us the only route left to personal freedom and a life with meaning. Rebellion is its own justification. The act of rebellion defines itself. And in these acts of rebellion, especially when they are carried out against monolithic forces of power, we see human majesty. The rebel is aware that virtue in the wider society is not rewarded. Rebellion allows us to be free and independent human beings, but rebellion also, I believe, chips away, however imperceptibly, at the edifice of the oppressor and sustains the dim flames of hope, empathy, justice, and love. These flames are never insignificant. They keep alive the capacity to be human. It is time for us to choose whose side we are on.